My friend Ari, famously, I always mock him. He goes, you got to edit it. You got to edit it. It's too long. I go, why? He goes, no one's going to listen to 3 hours. I go, then don't listen.
And he's like, cut it off when you're ready.
Do you want people to listen to your show? Trust me. Edit it. I go, I'm not editing shit. Fuck off.
Well, that's the signature, though, is the 3 hour mark. And actually it changed, in my opinion, it changed everything about what people were willing to listen to. I think the success of our long form show and more, a lot of it was born from that space. And that's why I think about it a lot. Was it intentional? Were you just like the original ones with Red Band, like the episode 1 and 2 and more? Like, when did the 3 hour become part of the signature necessarily? Like, why did you go 3 hours in the first place?
After 3 hours, people have to pee.
Got it. But then why are movies only an hour and a half, right?
Some Tarantino movies go longer.
That's true.
I think, honestly,
that's true. Actually,
I just feel like you gotta, to get an idea and really have a conversation with someone and get into their head and find out what makes them tick. It takes time to cook. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't just microwave that shit. You have to, like, if you have an important, complex idea and you go on CNN for 5 minutes and talk to Chris Cuomo about it, you're fucked. Yeah, it's not getting out right. It's not. It's like, ideas are like human beings. They're like personalities and the history of your life. It's complex. There's a lot going on. If you're talking about something, whatever it is, whether it's the ancient history or cosmology, or these are complex subjects. Mm-hmm. You know, any things that are really interesting, they require like long examinations of things, and even then you're just scratching the surface. Really, you're supposed to go to school for 8 years. You know, it's there's a lot of benefit in long conversations, and if I'm naturally anything, I'm naturally curious. I've always been a very curious person, and that goes back to I moved around a lot when I was a child. My parents, we moved from New Jersey to San Francisco when I was 7, and then we lived in San Francisco till I was 11, and then we moved to Florida when I was 11, and we lived there for 3 years, and then we moved to Boston, and then we lived in Florida for 2 years till I was 13, and then we moved to Boston, and I lived there, and that's where I started doing stand-up. So I never had a chance to settle down in a place long enough to adopt everybody else's opinions. I had to form my own opinions on things, and I spent a lot of time by myself. And so spending a lot of time by myself, I found things that I was interested in, things that I was genuinely curious about, and I pursued those things. And that's what gave me joy, and that's what fulfilled my interests. And so that sort of just spilled out into podcasts. Like, if you ask me, like, what is the difference between what other people are doing and what I'm doing, maybe they're trying to do something that they think is going to be the thing that works. And I just did what I wanted to do. And I got lucky that it works.
Yes.
Maybe a lot of people that just do what they want to do, other people wouldn't be interested in it.
Do you think if it hadn't taken off, you'd still be doing it? Like, if it was still like 500 people listening, tuning in, do you think you would still do it?
I don't know. It's a good question. Honestly, it's a good question. I mean, in the beginning, my wife was always like, you don't have to do it. Like, I have to do it. I don't have to do it. I made a commitment.
What was the impulse? Why? Like, I think, forget, it was already in that episode you did with the guy who inspired you. I forget his name, where he...
Anthony Cumia?
From
Opie and
right,
Anthony.
That's right.
Yeah.
Opie and Anthony. That's what it was. Is that you were inspired by going on a show. What was it about that free-flowingness, that something inside you was like, I got to fucking do that? You're like, I have got to do
I always
that.
loved to go on those shows.
Yeah.
I always loved to go on Opie and Anthony and Howard Stern and those kind of radio shows. Like, when I would say, if I was going to fly into Phoenix and do stand-up for the weekend, I would do the local morning show. And I loved doing it because you would just talk. They'd go, hey, Joe Rogan's here, blah, blah, blah. How's it going? And I'd be like, oh, it's great. And like, what have you been up to? And I go, dude, I've been reading this book about Zachariah Sitchin. And I would have all this stuff to talk about, this wild stuff. And sometimes people would say, hey, you should have a radio show. And I even got offered a radio show at one point in time. And I was like, oh, I don't know about this. I'm like, I'm just going to get fired, and then I can't swear.
Right.
Like, it's going to limit.
FCC,
Yeah.
Right,
and they find the shit out of you. It's real. Like, if someone says something wrong, like, you can get a $250,000 fine or something crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, like Howard Stern, that's one thing that people don't give enough credit for. They find the fuck out of that guy. And
You just didn't care.
He kept going. He just kept going. But it's also like the company paid the fines because it was valuable to have him on. It was also kind of a badge of honor that this guy is getting fined by the government. And this is during the Bush days, right? During the Bush administration. They went after him because of his influence. It seemed like a thing to do. And then when Ustream came around, where you could just have a webcam and just talk into a webcam and just fuck around, I thought it'd be fun to do. It was just a fun thing. And then it became a thing like, all right, we're going to do this every Monday. I'll see you Monday. Bye. And we would like log off and laugh and go, that was fun. But it wasn't a thing where it was ever thought about like, this is going to be a career.
Yeah.
So because of that, I just approached it. I just did it the way I wanted to do it. That's why, like, when Ari was giving me advice, I wasn't listening at all. Like,
right, because you're like, I don't care.
Like,
I'm just going to do it.
But if Ari was the Ari of
to
today, which ironically, he does 3-hour podcasts.
Oh.
But sometimes more. But if Ari was the Ari of today and I was the me of then, I maybe would listen because he's got a successful podcast. I'd be like, oh, I should edit it? Because no one had successful podcasts back then. I mean, Marin had a podcast and Corolla had a podcast.
Right.
Maybe Corolla was number one because I think Corolla was coming off of radio, and it was interesting to people that this guy who was the guy who took over in Los Angeles for Howard Stern when Howard Stern went to satellite, all of a sudden started a podcast. And I went to do his show before I ever did a podcast. And I remember I'm like, wow, you do like a real show. Like you got microphones and cameras and shit. And he had a bunch of employees like, oh, this is wild. And then I started thinking like, man, maybe I should do that. But like when we started out, it was just a laptop. But it's been a completely organic rate of progression, all of it. No think about it. One of the things I've never done, I've never advertised it. I never paid for advertisement. It's all word of mouth. 100%. I never did anything to promote it. I never went on anybody else's podcast and said, you got to watch my podcast. and I never did like a calculated press tour. Nothing. Just kept doing it.
I wonder if that's part of why people responded to it so much, though, because everybody's so used to being pitched all the time in every aspect of their lives that I actually think that's one of the things that appeals.
Probably. And I think people can tell if you're genuinely interested in what you're doing. And I think that comes out.
It does.
Yeah. If you're genuinely interested, I think it's interesting.